that's the challenge you got. I never was a calculating guy, in terms of, I'm not well equipped to that because I never was a calculating, planning type of guy. When I was, they all went awry. I never had many work out well. So, but what I did, and I don't foster this as being the way it ought to work, but I tell you, it's the way it worked for me. What I did when I came to AA, now you can believe this or not, but you can take it to the bank because it's a fact. When I came to AA, I didn't even, my first challenge was being willing to live. Never mind sober. Is being willing to live. I was guilty about breathing. So the journey back from me was from nowhere. It wasn't to a better place in society. It was to being willing to engage in society. And what I did, but not planfully, but the steps took me through it. When I surrendered, what I did was give a broken and wasted life to this program. Gave it to it with full reliance, knowing that this is my ticket to life, if I'm going to have one. And so that's what I did. And I tell you, things just happen for me. Now, I don't think I'm one of God's favorite kids by any means, but things just happen for me. I'll just give you 2 or 3 examples of what I'm talking about. I was a decent citizen in that prison. I never was a troublemaker, but I wasn't any superstar either, I didn't think. But I was pulled up for special parole when I'd only been in there 2 years. Now, I didn't make it, but I was considered. I didn't even know such a thing existed. Most guys in there didn't know it existed. But I learned later, they do that about once every 10,000 cases, where they take what they consider an exemplary case and pull them up to take a look at a special early release. And I went in for that hearing, and I appreciated being there. And they told me, said, we just wanted to talk with you about this. Said, we're not going to parole you, but we just want you to know we were taking a look at that. And I said, well, they said they weren't going to parole me because it had not been enough time served. And I told them that I fully agreed with that. I agreed with it 100%. Of course, there never would be enough time served. There's not enough time. But I fully agreed that would have been premature. It should not have happened. And I would have voted the same way. But we had a great visit. And what an honor, eh? That happened once out of 10,000 cases. And I'm just a guy that's trudging the road in AA. And so it almost assured. They told me, said, if you keep doing what you're doing, man, you're home free on your first eligibility. And for a 15-year sentence, 3.5 years was the minimum eligibility. And so when that time came, I was released. And that was really a harbinger of things to come for me, because when I had a job when I left the institution, my family had gotten me a job working in a mill down in North Carolina. And I was deeply grateful for that job. But this sounds like some kind of a hocus pocus thing, but it's God's truth. From that first job until I retired after a full career, I never applied for one single job. Promotion, transfer, nothing. And I had a career that is unimaginable. Unimaginable. And that's what happened. You talk about the career path. I took this on as a way of life. And what I found is that, I by nature was a good worker. I'm a good hard worker, and I'm a thinker. I like to do stuff. And but when I was drunk, it didn't show up well. But those same drives that drove me in such a goofy direction, when I got sober, they drove me in a positive direction. And so I was really a good worker. And so some of you may not be aware, but when I was out of the institution, I got immediately active in AA when I got out. I was a sponsor of a prison AA group. 2 months after I was out, I was sponsoring a prison AA group. I mean, I hit the ground running. I was DCM. I was elected DCM in my part of the state when I was about 5 months out. 2 years out, I was contacted by the North Carolina prison system and asked if I would consider taking employment in that system. Now, there had never been an ex-con in the history of this planet hired into a professional position, and I knew that. I knew that without any question. And when that guy that called me asked me that, I said, "Do you know who you're talking to?" And he said, "Oh yeah, we've checked you out." And naturally they had. But I was aware that so to him I said, "My God, I'd rather do that than anything I could imagine." And to myself, naturally, man, there ain't no way. They ain't not going to do that. But they did. And I was employed, 2 years after I was out. I was still on parole from maximum custody in Michigan. And in order to be hired as a professional employee, I had to be discharged from parole by the state of Michigan. So North Carolina is negotiating with Michigan. If you'll turn him loose, we'll tie him down, So now, you can call that career planning or whatever you want to, but it's just amazing. It's amazing. Remember that college professor I tell you about, the little gal on the street? She's a full professor at the university. Yeah, I can identify with that lady 100%, because that's what I did. I got here and I got 2 years of college while I was locked up. They didn't hire me because of my education, for sure. I never did know why they hired me. And nobody ever told me. I didn't ask. I mean, I just went to work. I wasn't even sure they paid for that job. But they started sending me money. And I did what I did in my career. I was not an ambitious person. I mean, I was ambitious to do good work, but I would have done the first job I had for the rest of my life, and I dearly loved it. And so I gave it my best. I really believe that if I give my best to a job, I'm a winner. I don't care what anybody else thinks. When I do a darn good job and I can step back and say, "That's good," I'm a winner. Yeah. And so that's what motivates me. And so I just started doing that. And I've always done my best in every job I had. And I'll tell you, there is a real hunger for people who are loyal to an organization, who do good work, real hunger. And I started getting approached by people who would ask me about taking on other jobs. And I did finish up my education in correctional administration, but I didn't need to, because my career was taking off. And so I moved into supervision and management, and then one day the head of our system asked me to come by, and I was working all over the system then, doing rehab work, and I loved it, just kind of duking it out with the guys and all that. And he called me one day and he said, "Tom, I'd like for you to take over an institution as warden." I don't think that'll ever quit sounding ridiculous to me. It's just, it's unheard of. I mean, my God, even being on the payroll was unheard of. And here he's asking me to be the man, and I said, "Oh, come on, boss." I literally, what I said to him is "I don't want to be the head screw." And he said, "Well, I want you to do it." And so I said, "Well, tell me what you got in mind." And so he told me. And, of course, he knew who he was dealing with. I'm the kind of guy. I'm not a manager in terms of, watching production and making sure we do it. I'm not that kind of guy. I'm a developer. I'm somebody, if I develop a plan today, you can bet I'm working on the next step tomorrow. And that's what he was looking for. And he knew me. He knew I was that way. And so I said, "Tell me what you got in mind." And he told me. He said, he described a type of facility. He said, "This has never been done in corrections." Of course, he had me right there. He said, "It's never been done in corrections, and I'd like to see a facility like this." I couldn't have turned that down if I'd had to pay him for the job. I get a chance to do something that's never been done in corrections, and to use whatever skills and abilities I had to do that. And so I said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And a wonderful, wonderful thing. For the next 20 years, that's what I did. I was the go-to guy for new facilities. When somebody wanted to make a change in one or somewhere, I was the go-to guy, and I'd go and do stuff. Had an absolutely great career. Great career. I would have traded with Bill Gates. Literally would not have traded with Bill Gates. So career planning, certainly there was a little education mix in there. But only reason I got education was that I got tired of having such a goofy-looking resume. And so my college thing, all of my stuff was just so erratic it would look like a Rorschach test or something. And so I just wanted something that looked legitimate and credible. So, but otherwise, man, I just did the best I knew how to do with jobs. And my history was never a problem. I'll never understand it. I mean, I would expect in an enlightened state like Kentucky or Ohio, I would expect this kind of thing to happen. But I'm from North Carolina. That is, we put Jesse Helms in the Senate for 100 years or so. You would not expect a brave new world to get invented there that was liberal in this beyond belief. But here, that rinky-dink state, the first people on the planet to say, why don't we just hire an ex-con here? And why don't we make him a warden? I know they all had to agree on that, from the government, everybody. But nobody ever said a word to me. Not a word. Or told me what a responsibility I had. But it was just an unbelievable kind of a thing that happened. And so I don't know what that offers other than I'm old-fashioned. I still believe that folks who do good work don't have to look hard because folks are looking for people like that. And I've had an absolutely marvelous time and seen it with thousands of other folk. Thank you, folks. Thank you, Steve. Tom, an alcoholic. Congratulations, Joe. Big foe, Joe. Way to go. Yeah, good stuff. Really appreciate it. Is it Kelly did the reading? Huh? Shelley. Yeah, I liked your reading. One of the few people I've ever seen that did the Watusi while they were reading. You were into that thing, girl. I tell you. It's great to have spirit in that reading. Yeah. Well, it is. It's great to see everybody. It's just great to see you. And welcome to. I know there's some that haven't been here this weekend, so welcome. Glad that you were able to get here. And if you haven't had a Jim R. steak, God knows, don't miss the opportunity if it presents itself. Yeah. And I went over tonight and I said, I don't want much. So they didn't give me much. I mean, they just gave a little old sliver of steak. And I about ate the plate that the thing was on. That was out of sight. Just good stuff. Outstanding. And I'm going to get right to work here. We got a really grunt and groan. This is my last shot at you, And so I got to really load you down this deal tonight. Tell you what, I want to get into a little bit deeper water with you a little bit. To those of you who weren't here, I told a whole lot about how awful I used to be last night. And I'm still kind of bad, but I ain't nothing like that, though. I told the nitty-gritty last night. And then today we talked a lot about steps, and we talked about this whole business of the steps bringing us alive. And we kind of ended up in sort of looking at what sets the rockets afire to put us into the fourth dimension, about real active service life and focus on others and that. And so I want to just kind of follow up on that a little bit. And a little bit of a risk in what I'm going to try to do here tonight, because I know this is quite a mixed group. There's some people in here who are quite new in the program. There are a good number who are excuse the expression, but quite old in the program. And so it's a mixed bag, and I think the balance, the bulk of this group would be a little bit older in the program. So with your forbearance, I'm just going to make a couple of assumptions. And I recognize they may not be 100% right, but I'm just going to make some assumptions and take off from that point. And my assumption is that this is not a group getting ready to make a 911 call. That there's not a real critical basket case in the group. I walked back through there just a minute ago to see if I saw anybody look like an eligible candidate for a emergency service. Everybody looked okay. So I'm going to make that assumption that there's not an emergency case. And I'm also going to make an assumption, which may or may not be true, that most people have stopped the bleeding. It's gotten to the point where that there's at least some pretty comfortable resolution about staying sober. And most folks have probably made some good gains toward trying to understand the causes and conditions. And I'm going to make the assumption that most folks have read and taken seriously the place in the book where it says something like this. I mean, I quote something. It'll be similar enough that you can figure out what I'm talking about, but it won't be accurate. But it says something like, of course, we're working on ourselves, but that's not an end in itself. Our real purpose in this working on ourselves, our real purpose is to be of maximum service to God and those about us. So I'm going to assume that folks have gotten past that just total preoccupation with me and have started to open up that the real help comes when I focus on others. I'm just going to make that assumption. And that we have grown enough to get to a point where we recognize that if we want to be of maximum service, we've got to do more than the obvious. Now, I won't drag you into this with me, but I'll tell you where it goes with me. That when I want to be of maximum service, I recognize very quickly that I have to go beyond my own shadow. If you know what I mean. I've got to go beyond what I just reach immediately in my sphere that I operate in. If I want to be of maximum service, I've got to be able to think bigger than that and broader than that so that I can start to affect things other than what I can just personally put my hands on. And so I'm just going to kind of assume us into that area. And then to talk a little bit about just some trends and changes in the program that I've had the opportunity to observe. Some of them good, some of them not so good. I have a lot of people ask me, because I've been here for a while, that ask me if AA is like it used to be. Or if it isn't, why it isn't. And I get that all the time. And I can tell you very, very, very quickly that it is vastly different than it used to be. And whether it's better or worse or not, I wouldn't make the judgment. But I can tell you that it was different. And in the old days, back the so-called good old days, I tell you, people that talk longingly about the good old days, I always suspect that they either weren't there or they got bad memories. Because I'll tell you, those good old days weren't all that good. And doing a 12-step call at 3 o'clock in the morning and have somebody attack you with a knife, that is not the thrilling days of yesteryear. Holding somebody while he's throwing up in your car, that is not thrilling behavior. So anyway, there's just a whole bunch of that stuff that does not bring warmth to my heart. The good old days had their qualities, but they also had their drawbacks. And so I think, kind of just speaking globally, that some things that I really see that are markedly different is the quality of fellowship. When I came in AA, we had about 125,000 members. Now, we didn't all know each other, but it wasn't unrealistic. I mean, by God, it was a relatively intimate gathering of people. And the groups were around, and they were scattered. And it almost reminded me of Ohio and Kentucky today, because back then, one of the things that I fondly remember the fellowship was what we called them inner city meetings. That meant we just pulled some cities together, and we had what we called eating meetings. And y'all, I don't need to explain those to you guys. No way. And all we'd do would be some town would take it on, and then this month we're hosting it, and we'd bring the groceries, and everybody come in. Wonderful fellowship. Great way to get to know your neighbors and that. And so there was a closeness in the fellowship. Even though we were spread out, there was a closeness. When somebody started a group in a town, everybody else in the other towns around would come in and sort of pull up the wagons and help get going. So there was an intimate quality in the fellowship and a close sense of belonging. And so that was a real good thing in that. That were characteristic of those old days. The other thing that I think was really telling in those days as compared to now, you could almost say without exception, not totally, but almost without exception, that every single member of Alcoholics Anonymous was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous because of a personal connection to another member. Most often a 12-step call, where somebody would go out and call on a drunk in trouble. And what that breeds is a couple of things that are vitally important. One is an unbelievable loyalty. That when somebody comes into some rat nest and fishes you out, or a jail or a drunk tank or wherever, who comes in and fishes you out, there is a loyalty that's unbelievable in that. And it makes a connection not only to the program, but it generates a willingness to do that for the next person. It's almost amusing to me now, in a way, it's kind of amusing, that we have gotten so limited in the amount of 12-step work we're doing. I would venture to guess that probably 80% of our membership has never been involved in a 12-step call, either as a provider or a consumer. On neither end of it. It's a part of our history, it's a part of our fellowship that's almost a lost art. Now, it still goes on, and there are pockets of it around the country, but by and large, it's sort of a vanishing kind of a thing. And so there was something powerfully important about that personal level of getting into Alcoholics Anonymous that bred a real fierce loyalty, that you were willing to reach out to somebody else. Really had a lot to do with shaping the character of the program. And so that was a characteristic of those old days. Back then there was a tremendous, if you read our history, you'll see it spelled out in there, a tremendous level of cooperation with the professional community. Won't do it, but I'll guarantee you in this room right now, if I ask you to, particularly in Ohio, where the seeds were first bloomed, if I ask you to name some historic non-alcoholic friends of AA who made significant contributions, in less than 5 minutes we could name 25. It'd be a no-brainer. But now if I fast forward that to 2007 and pose the same question and said, let's name a few in 2007 who are prominent, non-alcoholic public leaders who are verbally and spiritually and openly supportive of AA, that would be your answer. Because you would have a hard time coming up with any. So it's a huge change, from the time when we had that intimate relationship with people and a trust with the professional community. I won't go into war stories much, but everything reminds me of something. That's the only trouble with old members, that everything reminds them of something. But when I think about that, I always think about old Silkworth, the guy that was the doc attended Bill in Towns Hospital. I'd really consider him a third founder. I mean, I don't call him that, but I consider him that. Because if you think what that guy did, and it was just by contrast to where we are today, what this guy did, Bill, in that hospital, had that hot flash, and then he had this transforming experience. Well, every time I had one of those things, they'd put a net on me and lock me up somewhere because it looked bizarre. But we were blessed with a guy named William Silkworth, a physician. He heard that and he said, I don't know what it is, man, but you better hang on to it because it sure beats what you had. Thank God for that guidance. Yeah. A visionary man, A friend of Alcoholics Anonymous. A little later, this same guy that just got through with that bizarre experience to the average thinker went to that doc and said, I'd like to go in here and talk to other alcoholics. I need to. Now, you hear what he said. He didn't say, I need to go in here and talk to them. I need to go. I need to go talk with those people. It was his need. And he recognized that, and Silkworth had enough sense to say, well, go do it. He turned loose a brand new recovered alcoholic, didn't even know what he had. Turned him loose in that hospital. That's what I'm talking about. Our history is rich with people like that who just took unbelievable steps of faith, I guess, really, of helping us to get grounded in the program. And then, so, anyway, of course there are changes. Today, just like the resounding enumeration of our great friends in the public life today, our level of cooperation and respect in the professional community ain't hitting on much, frankly. It ain't hitting on much. And so I think there have been some enormous changes, some good and some not so good. And so, when I think of the old days, I certainly think of that. And there have been changes. And I want to share with you a little bit about some things, at least from one guy's perspective and there are probably others here that would have different views of it, but I was there, and so I don't mind talking about it. The things that concern me, I'll tell you this in front, that I have absolutely not 1 ounce of criticism to give to anybody. I think most of the things that trouble me in AA were our own fault. I have no real quarrels with anybody. And I don't want to overlook the fact that everything I worry about in AA happened on my watch. I didn't inherit anything. So anything that went wrong, I either failed to help correct it adequately or ignored it or something. But none of it happened to my ignorance. And so I take full weight of responsibility for some of things that concern me in AA today when I contrast stuff. So basically, that's the kind of thing I just want to visit a little bit in that area. And what I'm hoping is with the purpose of this is not just to fill a Saturday night. What I'm hoping is that when you leave here tomorrow and Dennis gets through putting the holy blessing on you, I hope you're going to leave here with a purpose in mind. I hope you'll leave here with something on your mind that concerns you about where you live. And I don't care where it is. Something that you just don't think is being done quite as well as it ought to be done. That alcoholic is not getting the full kind of deal he does. I hope you'll leave here with something on your mind that concerns you and a commitment to do something about it. So that's what I'm hoping we'll do here tonight. We don't normally give homework, but I'm going to try to lay that on your heart. And so I don't want to be sneaking up on you. That's exactly where I'm going with this. When I look at this, and bear in mind what I said, I'm not pointing fingers. Yeah, as I said last night, when I came in AA, there was no such thing as treatment or detox or any of that stuff. I mean, except the old tried and true things that like locking folks up and putting them in nut houses and stuff. But there was no such thing. And so when treatment came along, I was thrilled to death when that happened. Because, man, I was so sick of treating alcoholics in the alleys. In my county in North Carolina, in my county. In those days of just wild, crazy 12-step stuff, yeah, man, I've had 3 12-step calls, not in the same day, at the same time. Now, if you want to have fun, you get 3 brand new alcoholics in the car, and I got the guy with 30 minutes sitting on the guy with 15, and he's holding the one that just got in the car, yeah. And those were the good old days, yeah. And back then, there was an alcoholic. There was one old physician in the whole county that would, quote, treat a drunk. Now, what the treatment consisted of is that you had to take, and this guy practiced in his house, and you literally had to take the alcoholic to the back door, just like going to a bootlegger. Knock on the door, take him in the kitchen. And the doc would come in and pop him in the rump with something. It made him quit fighting. I didn't argue with what it was. I said, man, it beat what I had, you know. And that was it. And he'd write a prescription, and here we go. That was the total of treatment. I mentioned last night about having an alcoholic die in my arms in that county. And there was no place that I could take him. And so when you've gone through that, dealing with alcoholics, when something comes along like treatment, I guarantee you a guy like me is going to rejoice. And man, I was so pleased when that started to happen. First thing that ever opened our way, I don't get too far in this, keep me honest, Steve. I swear I'll get in it, man, we'll be here till midnight. I hate to talk by myself. So if I go to midnight, I'll be by myself. First thing we had in North Carolina was that I wasn't treatment as such, but somebody opened a place. I forgot what they called it. The name of the place was Wilmouth, Wilmith. If you think just a minute, imagine where that name came from. Wilson Smith, yeah. And so it was a bunch of AA members who recognized we needed something more than sobering folk up in our homes. And so somebody put together a place, and it was a detox type of place. And what they would do would be to taper you off. And they'd serve drinks at a certain time. And if you don't think an alcoholic can tell time, you put one on a time schedule for drinks. You know, if the drinks are at 9 o'clock, I guarantee you'll have 3 of them standing in front of you. Hey, what the But you could take somebody in there for $75 and 3 days later pick them up sober. Man, I spent a lot of $75 in there because it sure beat wrestling them. And so, yeah, that was the starting of the emergence of treatment. And that was just creeping along. And then something happened in, I don't keep up with dates, but somewhere around the late 70s, 80s, where there was sort of grudging progress with being able to get some access for alcoholics. I remember the first time we ever got to a point we could get one in a hospital in North Carolina. We had to provide the keeper service, the attendant service. They didn't want the nurses to have to mess with the drunks. And so when we'd put them in the hospital, we would literally have to set up a rotating attendant deal. And so I go in, I'm serving there, so I do my 8 hours, and then somebody come relieve me. That's what we did to keep people in the hospital. I went in one night. I went in, and the guy said, just like changing the guard at the Statue of Liberty or something. And the guy came out that was in there. He said, "He's okay, Tom. Hey, no problem." I said, "Okay, good." So I went in, no drunk. And I thought, where is the fool? You know, and I mean, where you go in a hospital room? The windows were about that wide. He couldn't get out that. And so I'm looking all over and I'm pushing the ceiling tiles up to see. You never know what a drunk's going to do. Look at the end of the bed, under the bed, bathroom. And I thought, good God. Well, I heard a little clatter. They had a wall locker over there. I heard a little clatter. I said, oh, God, here we go. So I go over there and open the locker. Now, he was only slightly confused. He thought he was in the bathroom. And he was doing what he's supposed to be doing. The urinal, it wasn't there. And I said, what are you doing, idiot? And he said, he looked at me indignant. You know, he said, I beg your pardon. I said, pardon my Get out, you know. But I mean, those were the good old days. Yeah, now that was progress, man. We were thrilled to be able to get one even like those conditions. So believe me, I was a happy camper when stuff came. And then in the 70s, 80s, the money started to become available. Money really started to hit the market. And it's amazing how money opens doors. And so all at once, when money became available, treatment became a national craze. And I never believed I would ever see this. But I remember one presidential campaign back in that period where a major plank in the presidential platform was treatment for alcohol and drug problems. I never believed I would ever see that. The day came when I literally, the best I could tell, treatment was available almost on demand anywhere in this country. Never believed I'd ever see that. Well, now that's a wonderful thing, eh? It's a whole brand new reality for alcoholics, a whole brand new field of hope. And it's great news. But sometimes great news has a little baggage. And what happened, at least from my perspective, what happened, that had enormous impact on the fellowship, on us. And it happened so quickly that most often we fail to establish cooperative relationships with this new entity called treatment. And so treatment just emerged, and it just mushroomed. And a strange thing happened, that every time a treatment center would open in a city, the number of AA meetings would just about double overnight. You just had an explosion of growth of meetings. You know, it's where this whole notion of 90 and 90 came. You know, this was a part of a treatment regimen that when you get out, you got to go to 90 and 90. Well, back then, if you go to 90 and 90, you're going to have to travel a whole lot. And so what happened, you started to have this growth and proliferation of meetings whose primary purpose was just to provide a place where folks could go in and catch a meeting. They started to take shape almost like aftercare groups, where nobody designed it that way, but it was just that way, where people come in and talk about how their day's going and all this kind of thing. And so we just had this huge explosion of meetings that started to just pop up all over. And it's really interesting. I don't track this stuff scientifically, but it's really interesting about the impact it had on our fellowship with, I believe it took us something around, if there's a historian here, tell me the facts on it, but it took us somewhere around 25 years to sell 1 million big books. Somewhere, right? That's pretty close. About 20, is that right?
No, I don't think so. I think 39 to about 75, wasn't it, when we had...
Well, that's 26 years, 36 years. God knows.
Something like that. Because I think Nixon got it, and he was in office.
Should have read it. Anyway, yeah, we agree it's a long time. But now you think about that. Yeah, it was about either 25 or 35 years it took to sell 1 million books. When treatment became a functioning thing in this country, we sold 1 million a year. Who you suppose bought them? Yeah, real impact on the program. Real impact on the demographics, the economy, all of that stuff. The largest consumer of AA literature was an organization called Hazelden. And so a whole bunch of stuff happened that really impacted the construct of our program, the design of it, and you know, it's a whole different subject, but I'll just throw it in that we have never been self-supporting in AA. Never have been. And certainly when treatment came along, we were anything but, because we have always depended on literature sales to balance our books. We've never been able to do it on the basis of group contributions. And so when treatment came, it became a very big thing, a very big deal. And so there was all kinds of impact. all at once, remember what I was saying about 12-step work and the loyalty that generated and the willingness to reach out to others? All at once, that changed. That changed. And all at once, where we were used to alcoholics coming in that door, all at once they're no longer coming in. They're coming in over here. And they're coming in a markedly different condition than before. Markedly different. Smell good. Talking good. Saying brilliant things like treatment is equivalent to 1 year in recovery. Or 5 years if you went to an expensive treatment center. But it was a huge change, eh? You know, the whole dynamic of how alcoholics recovered and the base of loyalty was different. See what I mean? It was a whole different phenomenon. You know, now we are spectators. We're not part of that. You know, we're not a part of it. But we're in the middle of it, you know. And so alcoholics used to come in here. Now they're coming over in here. We're still watching over here. And we're complaining because they're coming in over here. Yeah. And so it led to some really kind of strong negative feelings in the fellowship about this emergence of new stuff. And it's really a kind of a skitsy kind of a position where on the one hand we're grateful that there was a place for people, but we didn't like a lot of stuff about it. We didn't accommodate it very well. We didn't do very much to set up cooperative relationship. So it had huge impact on our fellowship. 12-step work almost disappeared. Almost disappeared. And very quickly, the whole ethic of 12-step work just kind of got on the back burner. And if we did get a 12-step call, the only thing we did is drive them over to the treatment center. So it really changed this whole phenomenon of AA. And so a lot of stuff happened in that. You know, on the one hand, I had a sort of a schizoid reaction to it. On the one hand, I was deeply grateful that alcoholics were finally being treated, the illness was treated with dignity in a professional setting. And I've always been deeply grateful for that. But at the same time, I was really concerned about the impact it was having on our fellowship, about how well we were dealing with it. And so a lot of just bottom line functions in the program started to change by that. To give you an example, a few years back, I took a guy who wanted me to sponsor him, and I always make it a point to get a couple hours to meeting time and go over what we're doing because it's serious business. So we met, and I said, well, tell me about yourself, you know, tell me about your experience. And so he started to tell me, and he described that he'd been sober at that time 13 years. And he'd gone to treatment at a place down the road a ways. And I knew the fellow somewhat. He was frankly, was a pretty superficial member. You know, I mean, he wasn't somebody that was in the trenches. He was just sort of a guy that sort of skimmed along in the program. And so we're talking, and I said, well, tell me about your experience. And so he told me about going to treatment, and he had a good experience there. And we talked about what he was doing in AA. It may interest you to know, by way of introduction, this fellow had never had a home group since he'd been in AA. He'd never had a service commitment of any kind. He'd never held office in a group. So I'm listening to all that. And I'm talking about a guy 13 years sober. So I'm listening to that. And so he's telling me about the stuff and all this. And so he gets there and he said, well, will you consider sponsoring me? And I said, well, I will consider it. He said, would you like to know who my current sponsor is? I said, no, not particularly. But you can tell me if you want to, but I don't care. Well, it was the non-alcoholic director of the treatment center that he'd been in. Well, being a quiet, non-demonstrative type of person, I just held my breath for a minute, you know, and I sat it down and said, don't break on this poor guy. I wait till my blood pressure's down. And I said, can I make one suggestion to you? And he said, yeah, what? I said, may I suggest that you've never had a sponsor. What you've had is the world's longest aftercare plan. And that was true. Well, here's a guy, 13 years. Would it shock you to know he'd never had a home group? Would it shock you to know he'd never had a service commitment? All he'd done, it was like the umbilical still hooked to the treatment deal. And so a lot of strange kind of stuff was playing out in that kind of a deal. And so it was a whole new kind of a phenomenon that we're dealing with that thing and learning how to live with it and learning how to have good cooperative relationships. It had a huge impact on Alcoholics Anonymous, huge impact on how we do business. And some of it is probably good, some of it probably not so good. On the one hand, I was deeply grateful because I guarantee you, I held a man in my arms while he died one time, and I had no place to take him, no place. You can bet it. I was grateful when the reality came up that there was a place where folks could be treated with dignity and professional care. I was deeply grateful for that. I'd never experienced it. But boy, it meant something to me when I was able to take people. And so I was deeply, deeply grateful for that. But here was a guy that was still attached by the umbilical to something called treatment. And so we finished our conversation, and I told him, I said, well, you're certainly going to have to, I better give you a little warning before you take me on as a sponsor. I'm not going to be your caretaker. And that if we get into this deal, you can count that you're going to have a home group. You're going to attend it regularly. You're going to have an active service life. You're going to do something besides study yourself over the whole deal. And when I got through telling him all the stuff that would be on our dance card, he was blanched to be sure. Yeah, he was sort of sat there looking at me. He was a nice young businessman there in town. And he's looking me over, and he said, God, I didn't want to get in a death march here. And you can tell what was going through his mind. So I just let him think. And finally he said, well, I want to do it. And I said, all right, fasten your seatbelt. And but anyway, that's what you were running into with dealing with that kind of thing. It was a strange new animal to deal with, and so that had some real impact in Alcoholics Anonymous. That the thing of 12-step calls almost became a lost art. That people who'd had a call and get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and go call on the drunk, it was almost unheard of. Yeah. One night I was speaking to a group over in North Carolina somewhere, and a drunk woman came in, and I always found that kind of exciting. So she came in and she was kind of humming and came in the back door. I knew she'd been there before because she knew where she's going, and she's wobbling back down to the kitchen of all places. And so it was really interesting. I was like the psychiatrist at the burlesque show. I'm watching the audience, and I'm watching the crowd react to this drunk woman. Now, in the old days, there'd have been a fight over who got to her first. Not in the new days. Because I watched that group, and it was fascinating to me to watch those perplexed looks where folks would look, what do we do? Yeah, what do we do? Call 911? Yeah. All of the typical citizen stuff. Yeah, that was that ethic of how you respond to a drunk, almost a lost art. And finally, no irony in it, I don't think, the oldest gal in the room, the oldest member in the room, male or female, just quietly got up, went back there, put her arm around the girl's shoulder, took her off in another room, and did what we do. Yeah. But see, that's what we do if we know what to do. And if we don't know what we do, we sit around and look like dumbfounded, call 911. What are you going to do here? Back in the old days, that enlivened the meeting. I mean, it was always kind of exciting to get somebody to come in like that woman, and it just juiced up stuff. You just wallow around with. I won't get into too many war stories, but I'll just tell you one. Way back, when I first went to North Carolina, I had the dubious pleasure of starting AA in that town. And it's an interesting vigil when you're the only cat around. Going to a lot of meetings by myself. Good meetings, really good meetings. Group conscience was a snap. And we got the group going a little bit. And, obviously I'm the only guy really standing. And so I was the only guy that was crazy enough to work with drunk women. And I made one call on a woman drunk by myself one time, and she trained me very well that is not smart, So, and from then on, I would always find me a woman and say, "You got to go protect me. I'm the innocent lamb here." And so, anyway, that was. What did I tell you about that? Thrilling days of yesteryear. That 12-step course. Women. I don't even know what the devil I was talking about. It was something about the 12-step course. War story? Yeah. Darn if I know. That's a wonderful story, but I forgot it. It just has to do with this whole business about doing what you got to do to get the message carried, and that thing of. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, that's what it was. That's an interesting thing when you're the only thing in town that's dumb enough to work with women. I worked with one alone. Then from then on, I never went that I didn't take a woman with me. I mean, my mother's been on more 12-step calls than most members. Sister, girlfriend, anybody. I don't care who, hitchhiker. Man, I'm going to take a woman with me because they trained me well. That first one taught me a big lesson. And so, anyway, something got me off on that thing. But anyway, forgive me for getting off into that. I really don't know what on earth I got into with that thing. But what I was trying to talk about was what helped me out a little bit here with that. Huh? The treatment thing?
Starting AA in your town.
Yeah, I certainly was doing that. And apparently not very well either. But anyway, just got to fasten your seatbelts and stuff like that. I knew if I got off my track, I'd forget what I was doing. That is so goofy. Yeah, but that's a great adventure doing stuff like that. Taught me a great deal. And I really don't have a clue of where I was going that thing. I got myself off in the wild blue yonder. Yeah, she came in, yeah. And I haven't had a drink since. Anyway, that whole business about the 12-step work to do things and the things coming out of treatment and all of that kind of stuff, that is absolutely an experience you ought not to miss. And I swear to God, I totally got lost on where I was going with that thing.
Tom, was it about 12-step calls?
About how treatment affected AA?
Well, yeah, no, that was part of it. That was part of it. Did we get finished with treatment? Got treated. I know it was in the middle of that when I deviated to some attractive trail, and I got down there and said, "What am I doing over here?" Anyway, those were thrilling days, and putting that stuff together like that was a great experience. And getting into the treatment thing was a great experience. The thing that I think that I learned as much as anything from that is that it's so important to separate what I do in AA from what's done in the professional world. And I know that working with people in that kind of a setting is awfully important to me to keep my feet on the ground and to not get caught up in losing my perspective about what I'm doing. I tell you what, I really hit a blind alley with that thing. I was talking about the treatment, the emergence of treatment and the dealing with the treatment. And I got that woman drunk, and then we got her sober, and then we got another one that was, and I think I stayed with her. I just never did get back from there. But what we're talking about is that thing of the emergence of treatment and the changes that impacted in AA about how we're dealing with people. That the deal of 12-step work went away. That we just weren't doing very much of it anymore. And there was an interesting kind of a reaction to that we went through some real mood swings with the emergence of treatment. There was a time when there was deep appreciation, but at the same time there was a kind of a nagging resentment about the emergence of treatment. And it was strange how we reacted to it. There was this notion that these people were doing the same thing with alcoholics that we were doing, but they were charging money for it. And there were a lot of kind of hard feelings about that in AA, of these folks are doing our work and they're doing it for money. And that we saw it as a sort of a competition. And learning to deal with that entity of treatment was quite a challenge. And in the course of that, there were some really significant things that happened in AA. That we stopped doing that active 12-step work. And the thing that I mentioned, that at that point, probably 80% of the membership has never engaged in that kind of activity. We hear about it, it sounds interesting, but we've never engaged in it. So the changes that occurred in AA with that were many and somewhat troubling. That real loyalty that came when you would go into some bootleg joint and drag somebody out, pull them out of some snake pit thing, the loyalty that was bred in that was fierce. Fierce. And once you get that loyalty with an alcoholic, I'll tell you, it's a lifetime deal. You never lose it. If you ever get the trust of an alcoholic, you got it forever. And so there was a powerful kind of a bond that was in place, and as treatment emerged, that started to go away. And so we had a pretty negative kind of a reaction about that. We got angry. We got jealous because people were taking money to do stuff we were doing and all that kind of stuff. And so we had a kind of a troubled relationship there for a good while. And so it made a lot of changes in the program and about how we do our business. And it continues to this day. Now there's a good chance, well, not a good chance, there's a fact that the day of the zenith of treatment is pretty well past. It's on the wane now. Now, I'm not real pleased about that. Even though I'm not a part of it, I'm not pleased about it. It meant a great deal to me when alcoholics started to be able to be treated with dignity in an appropriate setting with professional care. That meant a lot to me, even though I'd never experienced it. But it's going away. It's kind of run its course. And now the luster is off of it. And now we've got a lot of downturn in that whole treatment industry. In North Carolina, for example, I don't know of but 3 places in our entire state that I would recommend an alcoholic to go for treatment. Only 3. There were probably 33 a couple of years ago. But there's a downturn in that. And so that's going away. At least it's going to get reduced to a level where it's not going to be readily available. There was a time when treatment generally was available, and that time's running out now. The real question that I ponder is how we will deal with it when treatment is no longer available. And we're rapidly getting to that point in North Carolina. I don't know about Ohio, Kentucky, but we're rapidly getting to that point where it just isn't readily available. And if you don't have insurance, you got a world of hurt. And so those days, the golden days are about done. And so there's some strange kind of positive reaction in AA to that we tend to say, oh boy, we'll get back to the good old days. I'm not sure how we're going to deal with that getting back to the good old days. if you haven't experienced somebody coming into a rat hole and digging you out, it's awfully hard to rationally say, I think I'll go into that rat hole and get this guy. If you haven't been there, it's a scary place. It's a nice theory, but when the reality comes, I'm not sure. It's kind of amusing to me in a way. We're doing workshops around the country, or they're being done. I tend not to do that kind, but we got them now where we do workshops about how to work with a wet drunk. I don't know if you can train that. I think you just got to get used to that. Somehow or other you survive it, But it's always interesting to me, and I participated in something. It's always interesting to me to listen to somebody try to rationally say, "Well, I'm going to go in there and let this guy throw up on me." And somehow it makes less sense when the time gets close. So it'll be interesting. And it truly, 80% of the folk in the fellowship have never experienced it. And it's just like a Wild West story when you tell it. I had one a while back from a woman, and I still don't call on women unescorted, and I take somebody. My wife was the only one I could find. And my wife, till she met me, she didn't even know what an alcoholic was. Well, she'd heard of it, but she'd never seen one up close and personal. Then she married me. And even sober, I was weird. And so she got used to it. But she grew up, she was a Nazarene from Western Canada. Man, that's just about like Joan of Arc. And I mean, just pristine and pure. And so she didn't know how to deal with this stuff. And one day I had a call from a gal, and you can kind of tell when it's urgent. This gal, I was absolutely convinced was suicidal. I knew her. And I was convinced she was suicidal. And so I had to buy time, so I said, do you think you can hold on till 5 o'clock? And it was about 11 then. I knew it wouldn't be that long. But I knew it'd seem a long time if I told her that I was going to be there in an hour, and then I wasn't able to get there. So I like to get a little margin to operate in. So I said, can you hold on till 5 o'clock? She said, I'll try. I said, all right, you hang in there, girl. Now I was there pretty quick. But I started looking for a female, and most females were working. I'm the only guy unemployed. And so they were all working, and I couldn't find anybody. And my wife was steady to go out and spend some money, headed out the door. And I'm on the phone, I said, hold on, you may need to help your little husband get through a situation. Well, I thought she'd gone on. And then when I hung up, she came back in and said, do you need me? I said, God, yeah, girl, I need you bad. I said, I got a drunk woman, and you got to go protect your husband. And she said, well, here she is, a pristine little old gal from the prairies of Saskatchewan, and then she she knew what an alcoholic was. She'd seen him on television. And so she really wanted me to go. I said, yeah. So we go. Now, you never know how people are going to react, eh? You never know. I didn't know what she would look at. I mean, where an alcoholic hits bottom is rarely attractive. I mean, it is grungy at best. And so we go into the room where this gal is, and she didn't have to explain herself, just look at the evidence. Yeah. And boy, if she wasn't ready, she was on the way to the morgue or something, because what a mess. And I was watching my wife, and we stepped up to the door, and I expected her to be repelled, and just sort of draw back in horror. And we stepped in the door, and she stepped forward. And I was amazed at that. I was absolutely amazed. And I just basically watched her perform. She never even seen a 12-step call. But she recognized a human in distress. She stepped in, did what she needed to do. Now, I'm the hero. I'm the rescuer on the white Charger. Go in there. This clown takes over. And today, every 2 weeks, they have lunch. They don't ever invite me. Never said nothing. I mean, God, what kind of deal? And my wife's an Al-Anon. Go figure. But anyway, that whole business of that reaction to treatment, that thing of how to deal with treatment, that thing of dealing with 12-step calls, I'm not sure how well we're going to respond if we start getting those things wholesale. because it's hard to make sense to a rational mind who has never experienced being extricated from that why it would make sense to walk in. We'll see. We'll see, because apparently we're going to get a chance to find out. Well, I'm going to wrap up around an area of this. I don't get too hopeful because it'll take me just a few minutes to wrap up. But I want to wrap up around an area that whole emergence of treatment did have major impact. Major impact. Some good, some bad. And some we dealt with, some we didn't deal with very well. And the impact on 12-step work, that whole ethic in AA, I think really is on the endangered list. So we'll see what happens over time. The other thing happened was with that generation of meetings. I mentioned a while ago about that the product when you put a treatment center in a city was that you could count on doubling the meetings almost at once. And they basically did just take on a kind of a lightweight quality of one-dimensional meetings, where it was essentially how are you getting on, how's your day, and this kind of thing. And maybe it may be harmless, but it may be helpful, and probably relatively harmless. But it started to change the character of the makeup of our fellowship. And so what we've seen over the last number of years is a major proliferation of those kinds of meetings, where it's just one-dimensional meetings, where the value of the meeting is the meeting itself. Nothing precedes it, nothing follows it. The only thing to it is the meeting itself. Now that's fine if all you're looking at is a meeting. But if you're concerned beyond that, if you're concerned about the wellness of the fellowship, the readiness to deal with the new challenges that we have, then there's some reason for some concern. Because what happens in that is we were looking for a weasel, but we couldn't find one because I wanted to make a picture. So I'm just going to ask you to make your mind into a weasel. So put a picture in there. I want to get you to look at something with me. Of the impact in AA in terms of what these changes have wrought. And I think they're troubling. They're sincerely troubling to me. Give you one example. I was sitting in a service committee at somewhere in someplace in North Carolina. And there was a report being given on the numbers that we track in AA. Yeah, and they're the typical numbers. Members, groups, literature sales, contributions, all the stuff we count. And this is a few years back, not many, but probably 5 years back, something like that. And I sat there and listened for the first time in my recovery to a report where every number we count was down. Not one was up. In the real world, we would call that a recession. In AA, we pay no attention. But that's a signal event in the history of AA where we reach a zenith and we start down. That has continued, unfortunately. And so what we're experiencing is some changes in our fellowship that are deeply troubling to me. And I hope to you that what we're becoming is a fellowship dominated by these kind of one-dimensional meetings and an increasing scarcity of purposeful, well-organized groups that are built around the fifth tradition, where there's more to it than just me and my recovery, where there's a service ethic that's in place. And so that's starting to become a really troubling kind of event in Alcoholics Anonymous. I tell you what that looks like in the real world. Way back in 1955, I wasn't here, but I heard about it. In 1955, in St. Louis, Missouri, Bill Wilson, the remaining co-founder, spoke at our international convention, the second international convention. The traditions had been written, and that weekend, Bill Wilson turned the fellowship over to the membership. And there was no longer the Great White Father in Washington. All at once, the membership has the responsibility. The General Service Conference was formed so that the group conscience would drive AA. And there was a design to that that's a good design, which basically said the fellowship belongs to the membership. That's where the responsibility is. And we devised this thing we call the inverted triangle. And that's what I wanted the weasel for, is to draw this, but just picture this. You know, the AA triangle, the circle and triangle. That triangle with recovery, unity, and service are the legacies of AA. And so when it was turned over to us, the idea was that the grassroots, the home group, would be the driving force of decision-making in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now that's a good democratic thing, eh? A good democratic thing. That's the way it ought to be, that the grassroots are the ones who own the fellowship and the responsibility and therefore will drive the decision-making. Great concept. The only problem is that when we look at that clear-eyed and realistically, it's more of a myth than a reality. It's well intended, but when you look at how we do business as a fellowship, you know, how do we take care of the grassroots being the group conscience that handles decision making? For example, if we want to do, we were talking about singleness of purpose. If we want to do something about singleness of purpose of a global kind of a nature, you know, the group conscience would be what would drive that. If we want to elect, change something, want to print a new book or something, the group conscience would be the guiding force in that. So very, very vital thing. But what happens in real life, when we come together to express the group conscience in Alcoholics Anonymous, which is supposed to be the conscience of each AA entity in North America, when we gather to do that, we have just over 20% of registered groups that even bother to show up. And that's just registered group, never mind unregistered. So what we wind up with is anything but a group conscience. We wind up with a minority opinion. And so when you look at what we're doing as a fellowship and our wellness, does that matter? Now, if you're relatively new in the program, don't worry about trying to grapple with this, but don't dismiss it, because what we're talking about is our future. We're talking about the wellness of our fellowship. I saw a bumper sticker down in North Carolina a while back that really struck me in terms of what I'm trying to get at here, get you to worry about with me. The bumper sticker said, "Don't worry about your health. It'll go away." And that's exactly what I'd say to you. We don't have to worry about the health of our fellowship. It'll go away. It'll go away. Because without a group conscience that's well represented in our decision making, you know, we wind up a distorted fellowship. And so when you get typically the 20 to 25% is a pitiful representation, but that's what happens. And so what happens is that you get a small minority of people in the fellowship who are willing to take responsibility, are willing to get out of their comfort zone and step forward and take leadership. Now, a lot of times the way we deal with that is by sort of criticizing them for being politicians or something. You know, I would submit to you that we need to value people who step forward and take those responsibilities, because they're the ones who are looking after the welfare of all of us. And so they're troubling things to me. Whether you can put all that together in kind of a package so you can see what the concern is that eats my lunch, I hope you can. Because what we're talking about is how we do business as a fellowship, how we make decisions. And I think it's critically important. When we've got some stuff out, I'm not going to go too far into that, but there's some really troubling kinds of areas of concern in the fellowship right now. That there's been a thing going on about dealing with the general manager and all this kind of stuff. And there's just a whole bunch of stuff that really needs a solid group conscience to give guidance in that. And most of us are not informed about that thing. And that's where that structure comes in so valuably. There's another thing, and I won't elaborate on it, but I'll just say it, that when you look at the composition of our General Service Conference, when you look at our decision-making body, the conference meets every year in New York, and it has about 135 people participating. About a third of them are professional employees, are paid employees. Many of them are my good friends, and I love them dearly. But I really suspect that a paid employee who has no group conscience to represent is not a real good person to be voting. But we're doing that. And so it's a concern I have, and I don't know whether you've thought about this kind of a thing or not, but I think it's an important kind of thing that has to be solved by the group conscience of our fellowship. So, I guess the wrap up for what I'm talking about here is when you look at that and you look at our recent history and the changes that have come, some of them have been good. Some of them have been bad. But there is an enormous amount of tremendously rewarding service to be done where we get past just our own comfort zone and our own little nest and start to look beyond that a little bit to the wellness of the fellowship. And I tell you, when you do that, it's amazing what happens. I'll close up with just one little story that. And by the way, if you leave here with a little troubled feeling, good. That's what I wanted to do. I'll close with one little story about. You never know, when you talk about how to be of usefulness and how to be of service and all that kind of stuff. It's amazing what happens. I got a call a while back from General Service Office. Guy I knew there, one of the staff members, and he's a nice man. And he said, Tom, there's a guy down in Kenya, in Africa, that wants some help with doing some corrections work and trying to get AA and corrections down there. And he said, would you be willing to work with him a little bit? I said, well, yeah, but I don't speak Swahili, but I'll be glad to do anything I can. And he said, well, don't worry about it. This guy speaks great English, and he does. And what this was, the point of this thing is that you never know. I've got an opportunity to make a contribution to do something on behalf of our fellowship in a nation that's almost untouched by AA. What a wonderful opportunity, eh? Kenya, where this guy's from, has 30 million people. 28 million don't live in Nairobi. A couple million do. This guy's in Nairobi. So I got in touch with him and told him I'd be glad to help any way I could. An interesting thing when you start looking at the kind of stuff you get into. Now, what happened in that case, I think, was absolutely textbook perfect. This guy in Kenya contacted our office and said, we need help. And our guy at the office did exactly what we pay him to do. He sent some literature down there, and he said, I'll put somebody in touch with you. And he thought of somebody he hated, so he called me. And he said, well, you work with this guy. I said, yeah, but I don't speak Swahili. And he said, well, do the best you can. So anyway, then we got going. And so I made contact with this guy. And he told me about his situation there, that there are 30 million people, 28 million out through Kenya, 2 million of them in Nairobi. The only place he got AA is in Nairobi. And they're making a little start. So we started talking about how we might be able to get AA into the prisons in Kenya. And so I asked him kind of logical questions. I said, well, tell me what the prisons are like. He said, well, ask me questions and I can do it better. So I wrote him 12 questions. I like the number 12. So I wrote him 12 questions. You know, how many folks you got? Where are they? What do they do? What, you know, just a normal question. Do they have any money? They got cars? Can you get to meetings? I wasn't surprised at the answers. He basically said they had 6 prisons and they were all scattered not too far from Nairobi. That they didn't have anything going in AA. And I'd ask him about their resources and said, well, very few people have cars, and those who do don't have fuel. And money, the average income, the average family expenditure is $1 a day, less than $1 a day. So you're not talking about high rollers. Yeah. And so he gave me that information, and so what I wanted to do was try to see if we could conceptualize some way of working with this guy. And so, yeah, it's you know, just an amazing kind of an opportunity to be responsive to some needs in a whole different part of the world. And so, yeah, I asked him the logical questions. He gave me the answers, and that they had 6 prisons down there, that they had absolutely no resources, that nobody, if anybody had cars, they didn't have gas, you know, and so it was really interesting kind of a stuff. And I was trying to figure out how we're going to get a program going with this thing. So what I told him to do was go and meet with the facilities and do some public information and CPC work. You know, go in and meet with the leadership and see what kind of interest he got, see what kind of possibility it would be to get a group going. So he went, and he sent me some big pictures of what he did. And it is a fascinating thing, is these huge pictures, and they've got 600 African guys squatted on the ground in the prison yard. And my guy, the guy I'm communicating with, standing up on a platform talking to them. He didn't quite understand the message I told him. I said to just find out something. So he calls a meeting, a mass meeting of all those people. To tell them that they're going to do something in AA. He said, now, Tom, I've got them. What do I do with them? But I had the marvelous experience of being able to help figure out how we might carry a message into that place in the world where it doesn't even exist, and open some brand new doors. Yeah, it's very simple what I told him. I said, you know, if somebody's got a car, and so somebody's got enough money to put some gas in, you got to get some group work going. We get a team of people, and whoever's got a car, that's where we'll meet. You know, just the normal kind of stuff. And so what we've got going now in Kenya is AA going into some prisons. They're into several of the prisons now. And it's an amazing thing to be able to open up and to be able to be responsive and to be involved in bringing AA to a whole piece of the world where it's never been known. Amazing kind of stuff. Amazing kind of stuff. He something else he got. When he sent me those pictures of those African guys squatted in the dirt, he asked me an interesting question. He said, Tom, I got them. Now what do I do with them? And so I proceeded to try to tell him how to set up a group. But that's a wonderful kind of an experience, to be able to open up into a part of the world where it's never been done, and to watch people come out of the darkness. Great, great opportunity. It's also a great opportunity to be here with you guys. I have thoroughly enjoyed this weekend. What I hope we can at least scratch the surface on here tonight is that in AA we've got an enormous amount of work to do. Man, we've got huge challenges. We've got a lot of things that are urgent kinds of problems we have. I hope very much that every one of us are committed to doing what we can to be sure the next alcoholic who walks into our rooms gets a doggone good chance at recovery. And I thank you very much.